history. It was known for the place to be. You know, there were a lot of community people that were well noted. There were famous people who lived here, politicians, things like that. It was an upscale property. But what seems to have happened is that investors would come in and purchase this property with the idea that they would use it to drain it for its money. So over the years, what happens is this property and other properties like this across the city have fallen into the hands of ownership that have just simply recognized the property for being in Southeast Washington, D.C., being predominantly black, being people that nobody really is going to care about, who they feel is going to be disempowered, and they just take and take and take from these buildings until the buildings don't have the strength to stand anymore. So Marburry Plaza and other complexes like Marburry Plaza are just falling apart, and the people are living in those conditions. We have people that have been living here for 30 years and more who know the history of the building. And so now you got people that are stuck, more to say, here in Marburry Plaza, because to move out of here into the same type of space and everything, but with appropriate living conditions, is going to put them in a whole different rent category. So we're stuck in this situation. So what we want is we want to see the complex repaired, renovated, just as simple as that. But that isn't really in the ideas of the ownership, because that takes away from their plan. And you got gentrification happening in the city. So the land is becoming more and more valuable, but what to do with the people, that's the impression that the developers are looking at. It's like, let's get the people out of there. We don't care if that means that they have to suffer and die to do it. We'll leave them in conditions that are recognizably by the courts uninhabitable, which makes it illegal for us to actually live here. But yet there's no way for the owner to be forced into putting us into temporary living conditions while they make these repairs. So we're just stuck here. So, and this is happening not only at Marburry Plaza, but across the city. And this is why we need to just really unite. We have to be very vocal. We need opportunities like this to get our message out into the community, because it is about Marburry Plaza, but it's not just about Marburry Plaza. It's about the people living in Washington, D.C., who have worked their lives here, paid taxes here, and are not even considered as the city by OAG or the council members. They say they're not fighting for the people, they're fighting for the city. But if the people who work here, pay taxes here, and vote here don't comprise the city, then I don't know who does. So the city's got to wake up and, be very vocal and work together to stop this. Otherwise, it's not going to stop. Just keep following the money and you'll get the same results.
Thank you for that, Ms. Bray. I think it's really important, the points that you lift up around how this, I'll say this, this tool that landlords and developers use of literally running their buildings into the ground to force people out so they could take control and have control. And then, of course, force people out and do whatever they would like with the building. Usually that is, creating more expensive housing, bringing different people in, and displacing longtime residents of the district and of the ward. Mr. Quayle, anything to add as a resident there?
Yes, I really want to say, Daniel, it's always been about, I've noticed I've lived in Southeast since the 33 years of moving here to D.C., and I've lived on the Capitol Hill side of Southeast and across the bridge side of Southeast. And true, it's about location, location, location. Because look at that. You have Capitol Hill Southeast, you have Anacostia Southeast. And I think in having moved here from Capitol Hill, you see where the disparity, huge disparity, in just moving a couple of hundreds of feet, or let's say a few thousand of feet, it's a huge disparity as to how people, residents are treated, or just even the sort of mentality that people have about, residents just living across the river. And we have, for example, we have some politicians whose generations and roots go back in Southeast DC. However, when they get in office, they seem to forget, their roots of where they come from. And so you have people who are supposed to represent us, but are not representing us. And so I think even with that aspect, they too are confirming the, I would say, the mental, thinking of how people in Southeast are being looked at, how they're being treated or not treated. So that's the main issue that I am having a big problem reconciling those two things. Because we know, we've seen where the politicians and of course the business community, where we have investors coming, just like Ms. Bray said, and actually, I want to say, use the people of Southeast Washington. Yes, many may not be as educated as well as other, we're talking about Bethesda or Potomac, Maryland residents, but at the same token, they're still people. They want dignity. They want to survive. They want to rise above their circumstances and situations. And we have politicians who are so hell-bent on just making money. So therefore, they are also in agreement with how we have the outsiders, as I call it, business people, who don't have or really have no interest or investment within the community. Basically come and pilfer the resources of that community.
That's
So
right.
that is sad to see that the residents of Marburry Plaza have to go through this, I myself included, having to deal with many of the issues that go on at Marburry Plaza. That should not be, that should not be the standard practice or the norm, because as Ms. Cooper said, we all want to live in habitable conditions. We want to pay our rent. Again, no one is asking for a free ride over here, but what we're asking for is to be treated as human beings and to be valued as human beings.
That's right. No, thank you for making those points. I one of the biggest things I always say in these situations is, folks, regardless of where you live, education, folks are paying their rent, right? You have entered into a contract with a landlord, and you said, I'm going to pay your rent, my rent, and you're going to provide these services. You're going to provide this apartment. You're going to provide services in exchange for my rent. And what we have in the district is a situation where in many areas, landlords don't have to live up to their end of the bargain and find many ways out. Dr. Hamilton, would you mind talking to us a little bit about, because there was some success there, the Office of the Attorney General, if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, did come to an agreement where there was some rent abatement being made, meaning that residents wouldn't have to pay rent until conditions were fixed, but then the owners of the property, the landlords, filed bankruptcy and further created, an issue there. Could you enlighten us a little bit more on that situation and in general what you've been working on there?
And the reality is that many of the citizens are now being faced with making a decision whether or not to obey or go along with the bankruptcy judge's order that the rents have to go back to regular rent, because obviously this landlord has been able to finagle these tenants out of their TOPA rights. Now here's the challenge, Daniel, and I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus, but if we don't start having transparent conversations in our city, then our citizens are going to continue to be the benefactors of such negative outcomes. Now, what you call a success from the OAG standpoint, I call that it's not enough. And the reason being is because this landlord was allowed to finagle maneuvers that allowed the tenants not to have access to their TOPA rights. At the beginning of the show, you mentioned that they are rallying to buy their own building. As a matter of fact, their TOPA TOPA rights have been stripped of them because this landlord filed bankruptcy. And so now you hear folks floating around this conversation about social housing. But let's back up for a minute before we get to the social housing conversation. Let's understand why it is that we would have a chairperson of the housing committee in Mr. Robert White, having served 2 terms, and when these tenants showed up complaining about the fact that they were being stripped of their TOPA because of this landlord filing bankruptcy, Mr. White mentioned to these tenants that he wasn't that well versed in TOPA. Well, if you have leaders at the helm that are not well versed in matters that are directly impacting our tenants' living conditions, then I don't understand why you keep vying to be a leader. I guess if it's going to be a position that you don't have to be accountable to the citizens, then why not? But we've got to start calling this out. We have landlords taking advantage of our citizens because we don't have the proper leadership in place. DC has laws on the books. Title 14 housing allows for any tenant in DC to void their lease if they are living in uninhabitable conditions. And that's been the case at Marburry Plaza. The problem is, void your lease and move where? Where? There's nowhere to move in the city that's going to be accommodating for these citizens without them having to entertain stepping backwards into a social housing or public housing reality. And Marburry Plaza has a history. And there's no reason that we should be letting the government off the hook. DLB is supposed to provide written infraction of notices when they're finding these landlords. And I can take you to 5 different communities of tenants that will tell you they're not getting these notices. And so we have laws on the books that need to be amended to allow these tenants not to be left at the outcomes of legal suits. Why are tenants living with mold, asbestos, and rat, and flooding, and lead-based paint, and other issues that are harming to their health? Why are they stuck waiting for outcomes from legal proceedings? The district has an opportunity to do something different. DLB is allowed to complete repairs and put liens on properties. Why don't we see more of these types of enforcements happening so that these tenants who still, as they sit before you after going through the bankruptcy court outcomes and the superior landlord-tenant court outcomes, still live over there with these types of atrocities? And people are still running for office as though they've done a good thing. Now, again, when the Office of Attorney General, the assistant attorney general, would tell a tenant association president that's dealing with these type of issues in her community that the law is not designed for them to come out on top, how in the world can OAG claim victory when they know these citizens are living like this? Why does DOB need a call after 2 years of a landlord being held in contempt of court to go do inspections? Get over there and knock every door and make sure DC citizens are not exposed. But see, we don't have proactive understandings. We have reactionary understandings, and this is why citizens are looking for programs and platforms such as yours to state their cases, because they're under siege. The leadership is not accountable, and when they call, they're ignored. We're still waiting for Attorney General Mr. Schwab to set up the public meeting with tenants that Phil Mendelson, the chair of the council, said would happen. So these tenants are being bounced around, and it's a new year, and they're tired of it. So Daniel, I thank you for allowing them to come on the platform, because our advocacy is helping them to find their voices. Many of them are afraid to speak up because they don't want to lose their housing because of retaliatory behaviors out of the management companies and a host of issues. And on top of that, mental health concerns are what we worry about as advocates when tenants are left to live as these tenants are living. So thank you.
No, thank you, Dr. Hamilton, and thank you for that clarification. I kind of set that up so you would clarify what's been happening there with all the legal back and forth. So thank you for that clarification. I agree, and I understand it and don't necessarily agree with it, but the system is set up for the landlords to have more power. The system is set up where residents lose out instead of, once again, very simply, their contracts being honored, right? The simple fact that they're paying rent is not being honored. So we need to change that. And thank you all for leading that fight, to change this dynamic where landlords can do whatever they want. And when they do get in trouble, they find a loophole around it, right? So thank you so much for that clarification and for lifting up those issues. I'll share briefly. We often get calls from people from around the city dealing with issues, and I got a call recently from a senior at Marburry Plaza, and she was just so frustrated. And she was even frustrated with me because she was like, I'm trying to find a new place. And I said, unfortunately, we don't do that type of work of, helping people find an actual home. But I could hear in her voice the frustration of living in a place where the conditions are bad, rent is being paid and they're not getting anything really out of it aside from a place to hang their hat, as it were. And just the fact that it's very hard to get help, right? People just want a decent place to live, and then you have to turn to so many different places and look for help. And then the most obvious ones, our government leadership, is not doing what folks would expect. Ms. Cooper, anything to say on that point? The frustration that residents are feeling there, because it's real, right? People are suffering. People are going through quite a lot.
Well, thank you, Daniel. It breaks my heart to see that people are still going through this. I think about slavery, and it brings me back to that because we struggle for everything that we get. You understand? And it seems like they don't want us to have anything. The more we come up, the more they try to knock us down. For me, I know that black people are one of the most strongest nations that lives. And I'm just sick and tired of seeing the elderly. They can't even get outside. If it's a fire, half of these people over here would die. Especially in the 2330 building, they don't even have a ramp. If they can't get down them 11 flights of stairs, they're dead. I don't understand how the rich get richer and the poor get poor. See, the system is set up for us to fail. It's set up for us to not achieve anything. I think about things like, okay, they legalized marijuana. I know this ain't got nothing to do with it, but it's on my heart. They legalized it, but then when you go to get a job, your urine is dirty. You can't get a job. So it's like, but dang if we do, but dang if we don't. What I really want to see happen over here, I don't want it to be social housing. Let me say that first. Let me get that very clear. We went to have a protest, and it was for Marburry Plaza. We, slumlords, they help us, and we appreciate that. But at the end of the day, that was our protest. Everybody got an agenda. My thing is, don't ride off of our back in order to get what you want, because that ain't what we want. We don't want public housing. We don't want social housing. I should be able to move wherever I choose to move. You're not going to put all of us in one little area and say, oh, we got all of them in one little area. I didn't like it. I didn't appreciate it. And I'm not for it. I'm angry. I'm mad. I'm frustrated myself because it's a struggle. It's bad when you have tenants calling you 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning and say, Miss Cooper, it's a rat on my bed. Or Miss Cooper, a rat just fell off the ceiling. Or like yesterday when we was in court, this lady was crying out about her children are getting ready to be taken away from her because of her living conditions. But it's not her fault. It's the owner, the management, and DC government. If I'm not paying rent, the landlord's still getting paid because there's a lot of people over here that's on Section 8 or different kind of housing that help them. They still paying him. You know what I'm saying? If I'm not paying, why should you pay? So it is designed for the landlord to come up on top. And what they need to do is stop allowing landlords from different cities or countries, as far as I'm concerned, to come over here and tear us down. And that's how I feel about it. I'm going to fight until I can't fight no more. I'm going to do what I got to do.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. And I think that the point is well taken. And let's just say it, clear and loudly. This is a race issue, right? This is racial. Black district residents are being discriminated against, are being forced to live in these conditions, oftentimes by people from outside, of the area that have their only investment is the literal monetary investment. They have no investment in this city, in the ward, in the neighborhood, in the building, in the people, of course. So let's be very, very clear about that. So thank you for uplifting that, and thank you for this is not an easy fight, as we've all said, and you all know it best. This has been a long, long fight. This is not only a physical issue; it's a mental issue. This wears heavy on people's minds and bodies, of course. I did want to mention to you briefly, because I just heard about this, and we could talk offline a little bit about this, but the council is having a hearing next week on the 18th around the housing inspection process. The Committee of the Whole will be holding a hearing titled District Housing Code Inspection Process Broken and in Need of Repair. I will forward that to you all if you've not seen that yet. Potentially a good place to advocate, although we have the issues with the council that we know about, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Folks, you are tuned in to Taking Action here on WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. We are joined by the tenant leaders at Marburry Plaza, as well as with Dr. Rhonda Hamilton, who has been helping and supporting the residents there around the issues. Let's pivot a little, because we know there are a lot of issues. We know what the drive behind this is. But let's talk a little bit about what you all want to see happen, right? I think part of the desire of exercising your TOPA rights, which stands for folks who may not know, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which gives residents of a building that goes up for sale the first right of refusal. They are able to either assign their rights to a developer or somebody that has their best interest at hand, or they themselves can undergo the process of owning and running their building. So it's in theory, it is a great law and a great right for tenants here in the district. In practice, it becomes much more difficult. As what's been happening at Marburry, there's been some ins and outs. There's some loopholes that have not allowed folks to avail themselves of this wonderful law that we have in the district. But maybe Ms. Bray or Mr. Quayle, talk to us a little bit about what you all would like to see happen there.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. The thing about the TOPA rights, they're there. They're on the books. They exist. But tenants are not being informed. Now, we're lay people. We're not government people, so we don't come into this knowing the ins and outs of the laws. So we knew that we had TOPA rights, and we went out and we asked OAG, we asked Council Member Trayon White, we asked Mendelson, we asked Robert White, we asked for OTA, that's what I wanted to mention, OTA about this, who OTA has an outline on it. And they told us what the rights were, but they did not tell us the truth on how to bring those rights into play. They told us consistently across the board that we had to sit tight and wait for a third-party buyer to make an offer on the property, and then magically TOPA rights would come into play. That is not, we found out later as we continue to research and read and try to understand, that is not what the law says. The law says that when an owner puts a building up for, or a complex up for sale, he is required to notify the tenants and make them an offer as well within, I want to say, 5 days of that listing going up. That never took place, and then and the property was up for listing, and it never took place. And then in the meanwhile, bankruptcy occurs, and it takes it off the table. OAG's representative Myers, he stated that he just wasn't that familiar with bankruptcy, but he knew that this was something that is regularly put into force in these types of situations. So they saw it coming, but yet they didn't find the need to avail of understanding what our rights were according to the law. Now there's where the issue is. The laws are there. Some of them need to be amended in order to be strengthened, but the laws that are there are being ignored because the politicians and the regulators are too busy following after that money. Just follow the money and you can see where the problem is at. Okay, so we go back and we find out that in 2018, there was an amendment that was brought to the table to restore the TOPA Acts during bankruptcy. But in that amendment, it said that a third party did have to be at the table, and that they had to actually buy the property. And then the tenants could go back and offer to buy the property as long as they paid this third party purchaser a 5% increase on whatever they spent in investing in this property. That means over and above the cost of the property and anything that they claim they put into the property, we'd have to come up over 5% in order to purchase that property. So we went to Phil Mendelson's, to Robert White's office, and we asked to have that amendment brought back and considered again, and to be amended even further so that we could have it reinstated that tenants would be able to have their first right of refusal straight off the same way that they would. We asked what could we get in regards to having been overlooked and not being given the proper information on our TOPA rights. There was nothing forthcoming. We got put off. We got told eventually down the line they couldn't come up with anything. So we went back to the office, and Ms. Hamilton worked with us in putting together amendments for tenants' rights in order to formulate a task force for the building trust fund that tenants could be responsible for getting those allocations of funds in order to fix the property without having to wait for all these legal issues to play out while we live in squalor. What happens with that? That's still up in the air. We can't get any feedback from Robert White on it. He brought us back into the office again. We thought we were going to be talking about that and working on that. And by surprise, we wound up meeting with a couple of the DOB representatives. And that was just, I don't know, it seemed like a planned distraction. I can't say if it was or not, but apparently, from my perspective, that was a planned distraction because that entire meeting just was with DOB representatives trying to defend their position in coming over to inspect, protect human lives. But they don't take it because they're just being bought out by their own greed.
That's right. No, thank you. And I once again, I think it really does speak to the amount of power, unchecked power, that the landlords and the landlord lobby. Let's be very clear that there's a lobby behind these efforts that support, limiting tenant power, tenant rights, that find ways to push elected officials, I don't want to say look the other way, but to make their demands heard over resident voices. So we should be very clear about that. And that is the fight. That is the fight to change this dynamic, this power dynamic that exists in the city and arguably around the country, where residents have very little say around what's happening with their communities and their properties. We still have some time. I do want to invite folks, if anybody wants to call in and ask any questions or any comments, especially any residents from Marburry Plaza who may be listening, please feel free to give us a call. 202-588-0893 is the number to call. Once again, 202-588-0893 is the number to call. What I really appreciate about what you all have said is that this is a bigger fight. Marburry Plaza is an example. It's a symptom of a very sick and broken system. And you all are leading the fight, and we should all, be supporting you all. How can folks, if they do want to support you all, and once again, supporting what you all want, not, Ms. Barbara was very clear, people often will jump in to move their agendas, push forward. But what do you all, need help in, want help in, and of course, how can folks support you all in your fight?
Well, one of the things I want to say, Daniel, is that as you heard Ms. Bray mention, the Marburry Plaza tenant leaders here have been very persistent with the members of the council, and the members of the council have seemingly gone tone deaf. As you mentioned, it's by design. We're in this political season. It seems like the only time we can really garner their attention is when they want something from the citizens of DC. So we understand that those nominating petitions are going to be hitting the streets soon. And we're just asking DC citizens not to be so quick to usher in the same type of leadership that has so many citizens across this city choosing not only not to vote, but not to speak up and stand up for their rights. The reality is that we have a problem with oversight in our government. Far too many of our programs are failing. Far too many of the agencies that have been allocated monies to look after our citizens' well-being are not being held accountable to the proper levels of impact. We in the district currently have an 81 times wealth gap. And what that simply means is that the average Caucasian family's household has 81 times the wealth of the black household. And when we talk about justice or seeking justice for black families, we have a social justice division down at the OAG's office. I believe Ms. Berger. We've got to be proactive at getting DC citizens to come out, stand up, speak up, and to not allow these so-called elected leaders to continue forward as though these citizens don't matter. Just yesterday, the mayor touted she's got $500 million. I guess she's wrestled up trying to save the sports team, which they're gone. So now they're turning to housing again. We keep hearing all these conversations surrounding housing developers and all these power relationships, but yet our existing citizens are sitting on platforms like yours asking them to care. Citizens, we've assisted them with inviting the mayor to Marburry Plaza to take a look at present day understandings. And again, all these citizens are getting is the runaround. So we're asking DC citizens, write your council member and let them know that you stand with Marburry Plaza and citizens around DC that do not want to live as they are living, that do not want elected officials that would ignore the reality of citizens living so unhealthily. We're taking care of dogs and special interest in our city, and we're not taking care of these housing issues. If folks can't have stable housing, Daniel, then it's hard for them to stabilize otherwise in their living. So we're truly trying to change the plight of these citizens. We're asking you all to stand up. Let your elected officials know that you're not willing to sign for them to go back into office when you know that they are failing these citizens. I am Dr. Rhonda Hamilton. We advocate on the ground. www.healthydcandme.org is where you can reach us. And we're helping, Daniel, at least 5 other communities across the city. And what we're doing is trying to empower them to stand together so that their voices are louder. Because what's happening is that these so-called elected officials who are so familiar in name are continuing to be put back in office in positions that they do not deserve and that they haven't been accountable to these citizens. So please write your local councilman. Let them know that you stand with Marburry Plaza. We've asked them to amend the Title 14 housing so that the citizens can have immediate remedy for repairs that do not leave you waiting for legal outcomes. They have that language in their hand. And the final piece, Daniel, these tenants, I'm happy to report, all have registered to testify at the January 18th upcoming hearing. They have vowed to stay at the forefront. They've also solicited other tenants from other communities who we're happy to say have registered to testify. And Healthy DC is at the table to change the face of what we've known at these hearings where these citizens' voices have not been able to be heard out of fear. And we want to help them to eliminate that fear and stand up and speak out. So if there's anyone else out there in your community, be the first in your community, if you will. But don't stay quiet when so many are willing to stand with you. Thank you, Daniel.
That's right. No, thank you. Thank you. I think it's, our job is really to create a platform for directly affected district residents to raise their own voices, to voice what's happening, to voice the solutions that they want to see happen. So I thank you all for, keeping that energy going, as they say, because that's the way we win, right? Mm-hmm. It's not through advocates, through paid advocates, myself included. It is really to create a platform for district residents who are feeling it, who are literally living in these buildings, who, mm-hmm. Feel it day in and day out, to be able to raise their voices and change this dynamic that unfortunately exists. As we begin to close out, I just want to make sure we have enough time for us to wrap up any thoughts, any other things we'd like to get on the table. Because unfortunately, we could talk all day, I think, about these issues. But as we wrap up, Ms. Cooper, Mr. Quayle, Ms. Bray, anything you all want to leave the listeners with about the situation at Marburry Plaza. Mr. Quayle, I see you came off the mic right away, so please go right ahead.
Yeah. Daniel, in this process, I found 2 things out. One, that the city boasts of all these help, or all this help that can be issued to residents in our plight and situation. We're talking about legal help. They said, we can give you money. You have the money there to represent us. And we found out that we were basically on our own. If we didn't find people like Dr. Hamilton and perhaps legal aid, we would have been on an island still here trying to figure out what to do. Because the city has this cover sheet of all the amenities, all the things it can do for the residents. And when you flip the page is empty because nothing is there to show you where the residents can go to get this sort of help. Second of all, in this process I learned, and thank Dr. Rhonda Hamilton for educating me in this. Now, Daniel, we've gone to many of the legislatures. We've talked to, council members. We've talked to other officials within the DC government. And now I am in a place where I can call it out. Because what we were doing is, yes, you go in and you say, what your issue is. They say, go to door so-and-so and tell your story. And then when you went to door so-and-so say, yes, that other room in there, they're going to really hear your story and respond back to you. And then they say, well, okay, after that, we're going to give you another bigger door to go to. And you think by you going through all these doors that your concerns are going to be addressed. And what it is I've learned, what that is, you're being handled. And so now as people, I have learned now, I'm going to start calling out, people or agencies when they put me through that conveyor belt of doors to go through, that I'm going to say, I'm being handled and not being addressed.
Right.
Because they're two different things, being handled and being addressed as far as solving the situation. So I've learned now, thank you, Dr. Hamilton, for letting me see when people are handling me from when they're really addressing me and fixing my problem. And I'm going to call it out now. So I urge every resident, when they think that they're being handled down that conveyor belt, call it out. Put a stop to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper?
Thank you, Daniel. My thing, what I really want to see to happen for Black citizens in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area is that we pull together. It's more power with the people. The more people we get, the stronger we are. That's what I want to see. Dr. Martin Luther King, why do you think they killed that man? They killed him because he had a vision. That's why they killed him. Because he had a dream for us. That's why they killed him. Malcolm X, same thing. That's why they kill him. They kill our Black leaders because we are strong and we can still be strong with them in spirit. So we have to pull together. That's what I really want to see us as Black people do. Pull together.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bray.
Yeah, I'd have to piggyback on that. That is the main thing, is that we have to stand up together as citizens. We have to inspire the generations that are coming up after us to take part in what we're doing, because they are our future. We're living day in and day out in environments that actually affect the neurology in our systems. So, yeah, we're going to have issues with our mental functions as well as our emotional functions, and trying to fight through that and stand up to get to something better. It's going to take everyone in the city, not just those of us that are living in it, everyone. So I'm hoping, yes, you reach out and that you'll get in touch with Miss Hamilton and let her know if you have special skills that you can bring. And say if you are a lawyer, or if you have other special skills, just let us know about those and let those come to the table, that we can use them collectively to better ourselves.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Rondo, folks have pointed to you, so if you want to share your contact information, ways folks who have heard the conversation today that may want to support the efforts there, how can they get in touch?
Yes, again, healthydcandme.org is the website. Phone number would be 240-274-9436, and my email would be the word advocate with an S. So advocates, the number 4, MI @gmail.com. And Daniel, thank you again. I just want to share that this Martin Luther King holiday, as always in the city, we have a parade of events. And so we would like to invite any tenants listening in. And let's be clear, families of tenants, co-workers of tenants, friends of tenants, these families need your support, and we're strongest together. So on Martin Luther King Day, just as Mr. King urged us to march for justice, we're asking the DC citizens to come out and do the same. 240-274-9436 is my telephone number. Many tenants from 5 communities thus far, are mounting up to join the Martin Luther King parade, to speak out for justice, and to let the city know that they no longer intend to stay quiet or fearful of the tactics that are put before them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to you all for the work you're doing, for the example you're setting. I know it's not easy work. You will receive your rewards because you are putting in the work. Let me just say that. I feel that, the work that you all are doing is fruitful in many ways. Oftentimes we don't see the immediate reactions, but I think folks just hearing what's happening is a blessing. So thank you all for the work you're doing. We'd love to have you in the future to give us any updates that you may have, and just wishing you continued success and continued strength in the fight you're fighting. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Daniel.
Wonderful. Well, folks, we are starting off the new year right with some inspiration to keep the fight going. Please stay tuned. You've got COVID, Race, and Democracy coming up after the show and the news in just a minute. And thank you all once again. We will catch you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace.
All right, we're off. Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Please share the feed. Okay. Please share the feed so that we can get more people out on Martin Luther King Day. If you are in communities where you know this is going on, or folks that you know need this information, please share my phone number, 240-274-9436. Marburry Plaza is leading the charge, and we have citizens from 5 other communities, and we've got to fight these lawmakers and these so-called elected officials and let them know that not on our watch. New year, new day. Thank you, guys. Palms up. We're in these streets. We appreciate you. Martin Luther King Day.